up, we have Niels Rogge, who is a machine learning engineer at Hugging Face, who is absolutely infatuated by open source software libraries and things like that. Everyone love open source. Who cares as much, two hands, that's a proper open source. Who cares as much about open source models? Okay, pretty much the same. It's interesting. I always see like so much love for open source software, but then actually when the models come, we tend to jump much more for the Anthropics or the OpenAIs because they're far more performant and things like that. But open source models have come such a long way, even in the very short term. And Niels is going to talk us through this and talk us about where open source models are today and whether or not we should be using them. So please give it up for Niels Rogge.
All right, thanks a lot, DevCon, for having me here. So today I'm going to be talking a bit about the state of open source AI models for coding. Quick introduction, so I'm Niels, I'm coming from Belgium, the land of fries, beer, chocolate. I do work at Hugging Face. I also do work actually as a consultant at ML6 in Belgium. And I love contributing to open source and loving giving tutorials to people. So in today's talk, I'm just going to give a brief introduction to Hugging Face and the Hugging Face ecosystem. And then let's talk about the rise of all of these openly available large language models, and a lot of them are being used for coding purposes. So in case you don't know what Hugging Face is, our CEO likes to call it the GitHub of machine learning. So GitHub, you can host code on there, typically small files, few kilobytes to a few megabytes. But once you want to host machine learning models or huge machine learning data sets, GitHub is not really the place for that. So Hugging Face platform, this is like the feed you see when you go to Hugging Face. Basically gives you access to a huge range of openly available machine learning models and datasets. Currently, we have more than 2 million publicly available AI models from all kinds of labs, including OpenAI, including other labs like DeepSeek and so on. We have more than 500,000 datasets now available on the Hugging Face website, all available for free. And on the left sidebar, you can easily filter on a domain that you care about. It could be computer vision model, it could be a large language model, it could be a speech recognition model like Whisper, for example. There are tons of use cases available on Hugging Face. So in terms of the ecosystem, I would say the Hugging Face hub is really the central place. If you come to huggingface.com, you will find it there. So as I said, huge range of openly available datasets and models are available there. And then you can start playing around with these using one of our open source libraries. Like the Transformers library is one of our most popular open source libraries. We have more than 150,000 GitHub stars there. Diffusers is more used for diffusion-based models. We have a ton more open source models like TRL, which allows you to fine-tune open source LLMs and so on. And then you can either create a demo for your model through what we call Hugging Face Spaces, which is basically a hosted environment for Streamlit, Gradio, or just a plain Docker image. So you can create a fancy demo there to showcase what your model is capable of. And if you want to deploy it, we offer some solutions there as well. We have serverless inference using inference endpoints, which is very similar to the OpenAI API. We also have inference providers, which is for dedicated inference, where the model is only running for you. But you can actually, as it's open source, you can just download a model from Hugging Face and deploy it anywhere you want. You can deploy it on Google Cloud. You can deploy it on your own data center. You can deploy it on a phone, wherever you want. So actually, the Transformers library, which is still the most popular library built by Hugging Face, was born in 2018 when Google open sourced BERT, soon after the original Transformer. And then we really had a boom of a huge range of models being released on Hugging Face. So, and today, we have a lot of openly available large language models from companies like Meta, Google, Mistral, but also a lot of Chinese upcoming players like Moonshot. And so on. Now, a lot of people use the term open source, but actually it's oftentimes just open weights. So there's a big difference between closed source models, then you have open weight models, and then you have fully open source models. So yeah, for example, Gemini 3, which just came out, that's an example of a proprietary model or closed source. We don't know anything about it. Well, we know it's some transformer being trained using an autoregressive task, but we don't know which training data was used to make it. There's not a lot of details available. And then you have the open weight model. So a lot of these trending models on Hugging Face are actually open weight, which means that the weights are available on Hugging Face, but we don't know the training data that was used to create these models. We don't know the exact training objectives that were used. The code was not made available. So examples of that include the Quen models from Alibaba, the Mistral models, DeepSeek, for example, also released models on Hugging Face, but these are open weight. Because the training code was not released and the training data was also not released. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we have the fully open source models. So there Hugging Face has some initiatives like the small LM series, which are smaller models that you can run on device, let's say on your phone or laptop. And there are other initiatives like Olmo from Allen AI, which is an institute in Seattle. And there you have full access, not just to the weights, but also to the entire training data set and the code used to train the model. So yeah, it's a bit of a trade-off between open source versus proprietaries. They each have their advantages and their disadvantages. One big advantage of a closed source model is just performance is typically really good out of the box. You can just use it out of the box and it will work quite well. But of course, it comes with some disadvantages as well, because you're like quite dependent on another party. You cannot really easily customize the model. Whereas in an open source model, the model is only running for you, so you have much more control over it. Also in terms of latency, for example, it will be much lower. You can customize it, you can fine-tune it on your own datasets to make it really good at your own domain. But of course, there's a bit of a learning curve there. It's not that easy to just fine-tune an LLM and also deploy it. So each have their pros and cons. But what is very interesting to me is that the gap in terms of performance between open and closed source is closing over time. Like when we were in 2023, OpenAI was releasing GPT-4, and at that time, we didn't really have any good openly available models. Then Mistral 7b, for example, came out. But still the gap was quite large. And now, we're now in 2025, and this gap has really become very, very small. We see very strong models coming out, especially from Chinese players. That make it basically on par with the closed source models. And this is also an interesting trend, the fact that China is like taking over in terms of Hugging Face downloads on the Hugging Face website. So previously we had like the Llama series from Meta, which were very popular and lots of use cases were built on top of them. But for example, Llama 4 was not really big success. And we really saw a flip happening this year where, companies like Alibaba with their very strong Quen models, DeepSeek, which came in the news. Now it's Moonshot, which is having the strongest models. Yeah, they really took over in terms of best openly available models. You might wonder, why would you fine-tune a model? So here I have some examples. Like Cursor, actually, they also are building on top of openly available models from Hugging Face. For example, to make it really strong on a custom task, on a custom domain. In this case, is their top completion model. This is actually some open source models. They took some very strong pre-trained base model from Hugging Face, and then they made it really good at predicting what you might write next in your IDE. So they are using an open source model behind the scenes. Another example of this is the Composer model that Cursor is now using. I suspect they are using one of these Chinese models as the base, as the foundation of Composer, and then they fine-tune it using reinforcement learning techniques. And this is not just to make it very strong within Cursor, to be a coding agent, but also for latency purposes. Because like a big frustration of mine was also when I use Sonnet, for example, in Cursor, it can be very slow. I'm just waiting for the coding agent to complete. Composer is much faster, and it actually is mostly on par with it. So that's another reason. Also, for semantic search, it's actually really good. So this is really for the custom domain reason why you want to fine-tune a model. It's outperforming the closed source models because it has been trained within the cursor environment. Yeah, another example here is Windsurf Cognition. They also took one of these Chinese models. In this case, they took GLM 4.6, which is one of the best openly available LLMs today on Hugging Face, and then they did some reinforcement learning training on top of that, and then they used Cerebras, which is like an inference provider that, yeah, they create custom chips to make LLMs run really, really fast. So this allows them, yeah, to have much, much lower latency compared to the closed source models. A final example is an example I saw on Twitter from Datadog. They also replaced their closed source models they were using OpenAI before by fine-tuning on top of Llama, mainly also for latency reasons, like they required less than 500 milliseconds of latency, which apparently was not really doable with the closed source model. So this might be another reason why. And also apparently for cost reasons. It can be, yeah, especially if your data volume is really high. These closed source models, you are paying per 1 million input and output tokens, but if you have a huge data volume, then it might become cheaper to just use an open source model. All right, and yeah, I actually took a look at like all of the openly available coding models that were released on Hugging Face over the last few years. Yeah, of course, it's not an exhaustive list. I had to skip some. I just included some that I think were worth mentioning. But it actually started in September 2022 when Hugging Face started the Big Code initiative. I have a slide on that. And today we have like Kimi K2, a Chinese model, which is really great at coding. So yeah, this is just another remark, like all of these great coding models are all Chinese nowadays. So yeah, for some brief history, in 2023 or 2022, I think, Hugging Face started the Big Code initiative, where like thousands of people were involved. The goal was, at that time, GitHub Copilot was the strongest coding agent. It was more like just an autocomplete on steroids you could use. And the goal was to create something similar, but make it openly available for everyone. So this is really also the mission of Hugging Face, not just open source, but also open science, really sharing the knowledge so that people can build on top of each other's work. And the first release that came out of this Big Code initiative is Star Coder. At the time, so this was a 50 billion parameter model trained on 80 different programming languages, and it had this huge context window of just 8K tokens. And this was just the first release. So interestingly, they used this pre-training objective called FIM, or fill in the middle, which is actually from a paper from OpenAI. So the idea is actually pretty simple. So let's say you have this piece of code. You would just provide the first block of code as well as the last block of code to the model, and it needs to predict what's in the middle. And this allows you to create these step completion models. And I think nowadays, these models are still being pre-trained using this fill in the middle objective. Alongside the model, of course, as Hugging Face is fully open, so it's not just about the weights, it's also about the code and the training data. Hugging Face released what is called the stack, which is the huge data set that was used to train Star Coder. So this was 3 terabytes of fully permissively licensed source code, all sourced from GitHub, and the whole pipeline used to create that data set, including like filtering, because you need to filter, for example, out low quality code and so on. It was all made available alongside a research paper so that people can build on top of this. Then a year later in 2024, Hugging Face released Star Coder 2, which built on top of this. Now the models came in 3 sizes, from 3 billion to 15 billion. And they also released a new, larger training dataset called the Stack V2. So this was trained on 4 trillion tokens, and the context window increased. So in total, 900 billion unique tokens were made available, and it was much more than just code. But if you look at the benchmarks at the time, like DeepSeek Coder was probably the best model out there. They compared here and they said that in the 15 billion range, Star Coder 2 was like among the best available models. But this is still 2024. If we then look forward to end of 2024, Qwen started to pop up. So Qwen is an AI lab from Alibaba. So they released Qwen 2.5 Coder, which at the time was the new state-of-the-art for open weights coding. So here they are already starting to compare against Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which was the best model at the time. It came in different sizes from 0.5 billion all the way up to 32 billion. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to go into all the details, but they actually also released a paper on Hugging Face detailing how they create this model. So they do file-level pre-training, repo-level pre-training, and then a whole post-training phase using synthetic data, and so on. So I recommend reading the paper if you're interested in that. And then people, as Qwen releases model on Hugging Face, people can start building on top of this. So for example, here, Z, which is this open source IDE, they fine-tuned Qwen 2.5 for the task of next edit prediction, aka tab completion. And so this model was also made available on Hugging Face. They call it Zeta. And they did not just release the model, but also the dataset used to train this. And it's actually being used in production inside their ADE. Another example is Fast Apply, which is an apply model. So it will take in the code that the coding agent generates, and then it needs to figure out, given the current state of the files, where does it need to apply those changes. So this was also a fine-tune of Qwen 2.5. Then in 2025, there was DeepSeek R1. Yeah, this really was the first time that an open source model made it into the news, like mainstream, because yeah, it had some impact on the stock of NVIDIA, on the value of NVIDIA. But again, it's an open weights model. So yeah, there was a technical report. So the whole technique behind it is called RLVR, or reinforcement learning from verifiable rewards. And this is what all the top AI labs are currently doing. They're all scaling this RLVR process. So yeah, if you want to learn more about what RLVR is, there's a great tech report from LNAI on that. But as it's not fully open source, so it's only the weights that DeepSeek released on Hugging Face. Hugging Face released OpenR1, which is a fully open source reproduction of the DeepSeek R1 model. So including the training data, including the whole code and the whole process to create such a DeepSeek R1 model. It's available on GitHub as well. And then this year we have the successor of Qwen 2.5, which is Qwen 3 Coder. Well, there's Qwen 3, which are the LLMs, and then there are some models which are trained further on top of that for coding purposes. So in this case, they switched to a mixture of experts architectures, or MOEs, and they're pretty large, so 480 billion parameters with 35 billion active per token and so on. Sadly, they only released the instruction-tuned versions, not the base versions. There is also no paper. But it still allows people to build on top of them. So this is another Chinese model that was also released soon after Qwen 3 Coder. These models are called GLM. There's GLM 4.5, and then 4.6 has also been released. These are also adopting the mixture of experts architecture. And they're also pretty large, 355 billion parameters in total. And as you can see, they compare against like the strongest closed source models out there, including OpenAI's O3 or Claude for Opus, for example. And they release them in both a thinking version and a non-thinking version. Yeah, I don't have the details to go into how they created this model, but there is a paper available, so you can also see like how they do the pre-training, how they do the mid-training, which is the stage between the pre-training and the post-training. And again, they use this FIM, or fill in the middle objective, to train on code. And they even open sourced a framework called Slime, which basically is a reinforcement learning architecture for large-scale RLVR, or reinforcement learning from verifiable rewards. And it's also actually compatible with existing tools like Claude Code or Klein, which is another popular tool for coding with agents. And here they actually plotted the diff edit success rates between closed source models in pink and open source models in blue. As you can see, performance is actually not that far away, like it's higher than 94%. And so, yeah, they actually provide a whole documentation on how you can easily replace an Anthropic model by a GLM model, for example. So yeah, some people are, of course, making memes of this, like saying, thanks, China, for unlimited Claude Code for just $3 a month. Yeah, because these models are actually a lot cheaper than these models from Anthropic, for example. And it's just a matter of replacing the API key. This was another interesting tweet I found from the creator of Klein, which is another extension, I think, of VSCode. So he says, like, if you plot the performance gap between closed source and open source, like this gap is really becoming really small. So they're improving fast, and our users notice it immediately because, yeah, they can do the work at 10% of the cost. So that's quite interesting to see. And I think this is like the latest model that is currently making the waves, which is Kimi K2, which is from a company called Moonshot AI, also Chinese. Again, they compare against the best closed source models out there, like GPT-5 and Claude Sonnet 4.5. Again, it's an open weights model, so there's no details on the training data or the code. But this is a really strong model, which actually, if you look, for example, at the benchmark of artificial analysis, they are like in the 3rd spot, which is pretty crazy to see. Again, a huge increase in the number of parameters. This is a 1 trillion parameter model with 32 billion of those active. So this is currently like I would say, the state of the art, what you can find for free on Hugging Face. And this was another interesting tweet I saw from Tim Detmers, who is pretty known for techniques like Q, LoRa, and quantization. So he says it's so damn good. He's a very big cloud fanboy, but he's now seriously considering swapping it out for these models from Moonshot, which is quite interesting. And yeah, Google released Gemini 3 yesterday, but weirdly they did not compare against the best open source models. So someone from Hugging Face just added Kimi into the table. And as you can see, it even remains competitive among these giant models, despite being freely available on Hugging Face, which is quite interesting to see. Now, yeah, there's so much tooling that Hugging Face offers to get started with open source. So you might wonder, how do I get started with this? Well, I would recommend going to huggingface.com/learn. Because there we do provide a huge range of freely available courses. There is an LLM course learning how to do inference with an LLM, but also how to fine-tune it on your custom data. We do have an agents course. We do have an MCP course if you want to learn more about the model context protocol. But it's not just about LLMs at Hugging Face. We also do computer vision. We have computer vision courses as well, audio courses, deep reinforcement learning courses. LLMs is just one of the domains, of course, that is currently getting all of the attention. So yeah, this was just a brief overview of the state of open source coding models. I hope you learned something, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Niels. It's great to see how much these open source models are improving and giving people actually an option to pick whether they want to use open or closed based on performance. Any questions for Niels? One at the back.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the performance of like the GPT OSS models are. I didn't see them on any of the benchmarks. I guess they're not that great compared to the Chinese models.
Yeah, initially people weren't that happy with GPT OSS, but then after, like, let's say a month, people were actually quite satisfied with them. I don't think you can like compare them to like the best frontier models out there. For that, you really need to have like 1 trillion parameters, as is currently the case with this Kimi model. But I think they're still really great for like on-device purposes. Like, for example, Llama CPP is a popular framework for running models on your laptop. And I've heard from the main contributor of Llama CPP that GPT OSS is actually one of the best models out there. So for like on-device use case, let's say running on a phone or on a laptop, they are definitely good models. But I wouldn't use them like for coding, for example. Yep, no worries.
Got 30 seconds. Got a quick question if anyone has one. If not, thank you very much, Niels. Please give it up for Niels.
Thanks.